Azula had never been shy about calling him insulting names. In fact, he was almost certain that casual insults had been more common than Zuzu, and she certainly never denied to call him Zuko. She had a lot of fodder to create the names, centered on how he clung to Mother, his inability to please the tutors, his abysmal firebending progress, the innate weakness that she and Father saw they'd never been able to identify to change. Most of them bothered him, and he wasn't good at hiding it, which only encouraged her to keep using them. The only one that hadn't bothered him was when she called him a theater nerd. Urza had been an actress, bringing life to even their bedtime stories before Azula got too old for them. Zuko hadn't felt too old, but he was older than Azula, so he'd been too embarrassed to request that they continue. Regardless, he loved trips with his mother to see the theater, and even Azula had enjoyed when they went to the Ember Island players together, if only because Urza eviscerated the poor quality shows with a viciousness that the prodigy could appreciate. After Mother disappeared, they never went to another play, but Azula would use the insult every time she caught Zuko cramming a theater scroll in his homework pile, or humming the notes to the overtune of Love Among the Dragons. Zuko hadn't minded. If anything, it made him feel closer to his mother, as if this was a part of her that remained even though she was gone. Additionally, he didn't really think there was anything wrong with enjoying good storytelling. This was not good storytelling. The man at the fire had told a story that was winding, without a clear plot or purpose. Even his terminology was off. He called airbenders Airwalkers, and acted as though it was reasonable for the main character to think it was a human-sized parrot. He only really got artistic with it at the end, and by then Zuko was as bored as Aang was enthralled. The Fire Nation team was mentally going through the Airbender featuring plays he'd read to give Aang a proper story when the man stopped talking. Technically, scrolls with non-Fire Nation main characters were illegal unless the foreigners were the villains, but Ursa had a cache of scrolls that even Ozai had never known existed. They disappeared the night she did. All but one. Zuko's favorite. A biography of Avatar Kyoshi who had appeared under the turtle tree. Mom used to joke that she regretted letting Zuko read that one because he learned to be stubborn from a woman renowned for her will even among a nation who took pride in their tenacity. "Aren't Airbender stories the best?" Aang asked happily, and Zuko felt some of his annoyance at the subpar story ease. This was important for Aang. It was good that he got the reminder that his people were not forgotten. "Was it realistic?" Katara asked. "Is that how it was back then?" "I laugh at gravity all the time," Aang said immediately, referencing the man's ending line. Zuko snorted. "You laugh at everything all the time, Aang." "Well, so did the other airbenders. There used to be a running tab to see how many times you get a pie to land on someone's head, but only worked if they actually got pied. If they spotted it or deflected it, you didn't get the points. Monkey also won every week." That hadn't been any of the plays that Zuko was thinking of, except maybe that one scene As the Wind Follows. There had been a pudding, but maybe it had been inspired by the pie thing. Zuko was just about to ask when the man showed up with his hat, obnoxiously shaking it in front of a half-dozing Sokka. The teen scrambled in his pockets, but all of them knew exactly what he would find. Or wouldn't find. They had spent the last of their money in the Fire Nation Festival, and had been too busy running from Zhao since to try and pick up odd jobs. Anything but fishing. The man walked away with a disgusted grumble, and Zuko couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Mom had campaigned for funding to be channeled to the dramatic arts back home, knowing firsthand how hard it was to make a living. Here they'd even charge tickets, relying wholly on the tips of their listeners. Zuko wished he could give something, but he owned almost nothing and could not spare anything he did. Zuko jumped up and followed the man, thanking him for the story. Zuko watched as Katara and Sokka bickered about their non-existent funds. It should be fine. They would be able to survive off what they had until they reached the Northern Water Tribe, and hopefully they would be generous to their tribesmen in the Avatar. Zuko would get stuff by association. Suddenly Aang was there, moving so quickly that Zuko hadn't seen him shift, eyes wide and smile so huge that it seemed to be splitting his face like an alley pelican. "Guys, they say they saw the airbenders last week. There must have been some of my people survived. I'm not the last airbender after all." In his excitement, the boy created a tornado under him and shined at the sky, cheering all the while. One of the other story patrons gasped, "A giant parrot!" We're almost to the Northen Air Temple, Aang said as Appa floated past another identical mountaintop. Excitement threaded every syllable as the boy spoke, and he was practically vibrating in his seat. This is where we had the championships. Zuko squinted, though he always squinted now. Aang had never pushed Appa to go this fast before, and as they got closer, the air bison seemed to just keep going faster. The wind on their ride was much more intense than the rides were prepared for after weeks or a month of fairly sedated flying, with occasional bursts of speeds. The pie throwing competitions? No, Aang laughed. For sky bison polo. The boy launched into a well-detailed explanation of what was ignored by all the passengers. Do you think we'll really find airbenders? Katara asked Sokka, but her face was filled with hope rather than the concern and dread filling Zuko's stomach. You want me to be like you or totally honest? Sokka asked. Are you calling me a liar? Katara asked, affronted. I'm saying you're an optimist. Same thing, basically. Katara huffed and turned to the boy who had said hardly a word since Aang had made his announcement. What do you think, Zuko? She asked, as though expecting him to be on her side. He wished he could be. My people were very thorough, Katara. If Fire Lord Sozin saw them as a threat, well, neither he nor any Fire Lord after him would known for doing things part way, nor for showing mercy. The girl cast an anxious look at Aang, pain creasing her face. An attempt to just get rid of that look, Zuko allowed. Although they were nomads, how can I say that they didn't miss a couple who were off doing couple things? In 100 years, you can have as many as 4 or 5 generations easily. There's a chance. Sokka sent him a look, while Katara's smile returned. Zuko scowled in response and looked down. Nothing that he said was false. It's just that, well, his people were very thorough. They'd killed the last of the dragons, spiritual creatures blessed to be the first firebenders. If they managed to hunt down each and every one of them, Zuko feared that the air nomads had been much trouble. He shouldn't have said anything. He spent too long with dwindling non-existent hope. He'd forgotten how much it hurt to be disappointed. Except maybe they wouldn't be disappointed. Hey guys, look! Aang shouted and gleefully pointed at an impossibility. They could see the air temple in the distance, and it was absolutely surrounded by flying figures. Figures larger than any giant parrot. People. Airbenders. His people had failed. If Zuko hadn't become so much a traitor, that thought wouldn't bring him so much joy. But looking at Aang's face, he couldn't find in himself to feel anything else. Katara gasped in wonder. There really are airbenders! No, they're not, Aang argued, his excitement having drained with startling speed. The boy crossed his arms and settled petulantly against the bison's head. What do you mean? Sokka demanded. Those guys are flying. Gliding, maybe, Aang said angrily, but not flying. You can tell by the way they move. Zuko squinted at the figures and could kind of see what Aang was talking about. They're all going along the same paths. They're riding air currents. Riding them, not creating them, Aang agreed. They're not airbenders. Those people have no spirit. Zuko caught movement out of the corner of his eye and hit the deck, grabbing the protesting Sokka and dragging him with him, though Katara was too far away at the front of the saddle. The pair had barely hit the ground when suddenly a cart glided inches from where their heads had been. A boy in green laughed merrily as he passed by. Zuko popped up with a scowl, punching out a firebending move that would have served as a warning shot, just as close as the stranger's dive had been. It would have, at least, if he could produce anything more than a weak-looking puff of smoke. Sokka patted Zuko on the back awkwardly as Katara turned back to Aang. I don't know, Aang. That kid seems to be pretty spirited to me. The kid swung back up by Appa's head, sending Aang a look. And suddenly Aang's face morphed into a competitive smirk, the likes of which Zuko had never seen on the boy's face, and immediately jumped at the bison, his staff growing its sails as he chased after the glider. Great, yeah, just go after the stranger, Aang. Great idea, Zuko grumbled, and Sokka laughed at him. You're just grumpy because the guy didn't notice your fireproof. It's a good thing he didn't notice my bending. He's Earth Kingdom. It would have been bad for us. I shouldn't have even tried. Zuko grumbled, and looked away so he didn't have to acknowledge that it wasn't the bending that had upset him. It was Aang's face just before he jumped off into the sky. It was an expression that Zuko had never seen before, but one that fit the child so well. How many times had he made it in the past? Flown circles around other child monks in the temples, played games with people who could actually keep up. How much had his people actually taken from him? Luckily, the team was momentarily broken from his thoughts when two close flying gliders got too close to stop his nose, and the bison jerked back, jolting the trio in the saddle. "We need to get some land before it gets to us first," Sokka said once they settled. Zuko happily jumped to steer the bison to the temple, anything to keep his mind focused on anything else. Anything beyond how good it looked to see Aang racing the glider. It wasn't much of a race. Aang had a freedom of movement that the glider simply couldn't accomplish, running along walls and using his air sphere where the Earth Kingdom boy had been more restricted. Though using smoke to create a caricature of Aang was a decent comeback. Still, when Aang landed beside Katara and Sokka, there was something impossible to decipher in expression. The Earth Kingdom team landed shortly after, skiing halfway across the platform before stopping. Immediately, other children came forward to remove the wings and top of the cart. Though it became clear the boy wouldn't be getting out of the cart itself, as he expertly wheeled himself over to the trio. What followed was a lot of geeking out. The kid, Tio, apparently geeked out because of the earbending and avatarness. Sokka geeking out about the gliding chair. Zuko geeking out about nothing and tried very hard not to see ghosts in every corner. Theo led them through the temple, and Zuko had to fight to keep his face from screwing up. It wasn't bad per se, but with the plays and Uncle's teachings, he pictured the nomad temples as something of beauty, clean and simple. This was not that. There were pipes filling so much space, and the lines were hard to follow with his eyes, and the walls had become an off-colored gray. Some of the pipes even bisected reliefs and carvings and sculptures, creating ugly holes and cracks in likely once beautiful designs. It was sad. Probably a lot sadder for Aang. Zuko realized when the boy flatly refused to share in Teo's pride and Sokka's wonder. Zuko followed when Aang walked away, placing a hand on the younger boy's shoulder. Aang cast him a weak attempt to smile, and he walked him over to a large mural that had probably been stunning before it was stained with soot and marred by piping. Katara came to the boy's other side and offered her silent support as well. "This is supposed to be the history of my people," Aang said mournfully, gesturing at the images of monks and bisons still faintly visible. One feature had even been decapitated by extremely disrespectful pipe placement. He wandered over to a stylized statue of a bison, the fountain now filled with disgusting polluted refuse. A plume of dark, sick-looking smog burst from the statue's mouth, making Aang jump back in disgust. Zuko twitched awkwardly. "Do you want me to yell at someone? I'm really, really good at it," he offered. Aang's answering smile was a little less weak this time. "No, you don't have to do that. If that changes, let me know." "I will, thanks." Katara, still on this bizarrely nice kick, sent Zuko a wide smile before turning back to Aang. "I'm sure there's some parts of the temple that are still the same." "Maybe. Hey Tio, are there any parts of the temple that haven't been changed like this?" The boy, who'd been deeply entranced with Sokka about something, scrunched his face in thought before brightening. "Yeah, there are some platforms in the east side of the temple that are kind of tricky to get to, so we haven't done much with them. I can show you the way if you want." Zuko sneered, anger and guilt melting in his stomach uncomfortably. That mural was just as stained with smoke, dust, and ash as it had been ruined by pipes. His people had brought this pain to Aang just as much as these squatters did. He'd already realized that this war was wrong, that they shouldn't be fighting, be decimating like they were. Was it so much of a leap to think that they had never been right? It was hard to think anything else at the moment. He was furious that Aang had lost so much, and felt horrendous guilt knowing that his people had played a part. But Sozin wasn't here. This kid, this trespasser was. "I'm sure Aang knows this place far better than you. We don't need a guide." Sokka cast him a surprised, reproachful look as Tio flinched back physically from the vitriol in Zuko's voice, the venom in his words. The look Aang sent was understanding, almost grateful, but he shook his head. It's okay, Zuko. I'm upset, but it isn't Tio's fault. No, it was the Fire Nation's. His people. His. We would be honored if you show us the way. Tio sent a hesitant smile at the boy, but still watched Zuko carefully until Katara cut in. Sorry about Zuko. He's just really protective of Aang. I am not, Zuko protested hotly. No, of course not, Sokka mocked, having gotten over his shock. You just single-handedly snuck into a Fire Nation stronghold for him. I mean that I'm risking arrested by the Fire Nation to get him a teacher. I just wanted fire flakes. And you? Enough! I get it, he grumbled, and Tio laughed. It's okay, the boy said with easy casualness. I can understand being protective of someone. It isn't a bad deal, I forgive you. I don't like to be mad at people anyway. Zuko squinted at him. Are you sure you're not an airbender? Aang laughed. Maybe some of our philosophies have rubbed off on you just by living here. Tio grinned. Well, I wouldn't mind that. The airbenders seemed awesome. How about this? You can tell me all about them on our way to the eastern platforms. Only if you tell me how you guys ended up here in the first place. Zuko trailed slightly behind the group and tried very hard to look as not Fire Nation as possible, as Tio led them through the winding corridors. They were refugees. Of course they were refugees. Every time you see Earth Kingdom people in weird places, it was because they were refugees fleeing the war, which meant that his people were not only the whole reason this place got abandoned, it was also the reason why it got re-inhabited. Why even this last spot of the air nomads had been changed and destroyed. It's nice to see at least one part of the temple isn't ruined, Aang said happily as they made their way into a courtyard. There were wooden doors surrounding the area, likely dorms, and a few noble and peaceful statues acting as guards. Aang stared at one of the statues with the faintest hint of peace that had crossed his face since they'd landed. Zuko was about to ask Aang about the figure's history when suddenly a loud voice yelled, "Look out!" And the statue was destroyed right in front of Aang's eyes. Out of the dust stepped a man with the worst haircut Zuko had ever seen, and he tried to do a bald phoenix plume after his injury. What the doodle? The man asked, and Zuko was even more certain that he did not like him. Don't you know better than to be in an active construction zone? We have to make room for the new bathhouse. Do you know what you just did? Aang asked, voice filled with passionate fury that sent shivers down Zuko's spine. You just destroyed something sacred for a stupid bathhouse, he cried, anger so intense that his voice broke. The man seemed entirely oblivious. Well, people around here are starting to stink. As though that was the important point. This whole place stinks, Aang shrieked, sending a gust of wind to push the destruction machine off the mountain face. This is a sacred temple. You can't treat it this way. I know what it's supposed to be like. The monks? The man asked. But you're 12. Dad, he's the Avatar, Tio responded. He used to be here 100 years ago. What are you doing? Who said you could do this? Aang asked, his fury not abated in the least. Just because you're refugees doesn't mean you can destroy something sacred. Destroy history. The man wove a tale that would have been heart-rending had he not said it in such a ridiculous way that he had been completely oblivious to the anger that was only building in Aang as he spoke of improvement and progress. The distracted man soon had his attention drawn away as he realized the time, dismissing his conversation with Aang as though that was clear for him as a precaution. Zuko attempted to smile at Aang. Looks like I'm not the only one who's good at yelling. The boy grimaced. Yeah, I kind of lost my temper. It isn't always a bad thing, Aang. Maybe he'll be more careful with this place now that he knows how important it is. The Avatar perked. Yeah, maybe. Tia rode up to them. Hey, Aang, I want to show you something. The boy looked hesitant, but nodded. Zuko looked up. But Sokka was always wandering off with the weird dude, so he shrugged. Might as well stick with the airbender. Aang needed all the help he could get.